I'm David Boje.
So I'm Duncan Pelly.
I'm Dr. Jillian Sailors.
My name is Sabina Trofimo.
And I'm Ronnie Sailors, and this is the Enthinkment Circle.
In the book, I start off with the foreword about a double meaning of the word tear, T-E-A-R. In one sense, I say that in 1986, when Louis Pondy was at the August meeting of the Academy of Management, he did a confession that most of the avenues of research, including the one he was most famous for, his 1967 Administrative Science Quarterly article on episodic conflict, that it was more or less a dead end, more or less a model in error. In fact, the 1966 dissertation showed that 2 of the 3 cases did not fit the model, which was then published a year later in Administrative Science Quarterly. So among the confessions that he did was that tear, I believe, rolling down his cheek as he addressed the Academy of Management and told them that, hey, the model that I'm so famous for didn't really bear out. In fact, I want to say that organizations are more conflict systems than they are cooperation systems. It's only very rarely do they engage in the kind of cooperation. So the second notion of a tear, one is the tear that goes down your cheek. The other is a tear that's pronounced tear. It's a tearing away. And this tearing away is something that Sabine Trofimo and I have looked at in Hegel's notion of the sock that's torn has more force and power than the sock that's new or the sock that's mended. And that's Hegel's notion that Heidegger, in a couple of different books, goes through that at length, trying to understand why that would be the case. And for me, when we're looking at Pondy's contribution to management thought, he's saying that, look, the tear in the fabric of management thought is what he has devoted his life, his short life, by the way, dying at age 49, to figuring it out. So this is where the notion of enthinkment, just pull up a figure here for you to see. If we look at 3 personalities here, Louis Pondy, and we put the 3 in the notion of Peirce's firstness, secondness, and thirdness. Peirce is in the picture on the bottom with the big beard, and the person upper right with the beard is Carl Weick. The person upper left would be Lou Pondy, jumping around and tossing formula, physics formula, time, space, matter formula between his 2 hands. And Sabine Trofimo was gracious enough to draw that figure. And so what we're calling enthinkment actually started as a joke. About 1978 is the best year I can figure out when it happened. It's reported in 1979 by Carl Weick as a kind of a joke that Lou Pondy played, saying, well, what if it's enthinkment? What if it's how people are thinking about things? And then Weick said, no, it's enactment. Enactment is the sense making, And what I'm doing in the book is figuring out, what if Pondy's joke has a grain of truth in it, and we need to be training our MBAs and our leaders and our doctoral students and our colleagues how to think. The title of a John Dewey book, How to Think. And the title of a Heidegger book, what is called thinking. So I think sense making has its place and the enactment has its place, and retrospective, looking backwards, has its place in that secondness, but the firstness has its place too. So rather than setting up a duality between these two very important facets of organizational life and theory, want to build our Enthinkment skills, want to build our enactment skills. And I believe the way to do that is with the thirdness that Charles Saunders Peirce talks about when he comes at it from the notion of the continuity, the agape love. And that's notion of time as a continuum is quite different from the firstness Enthinkment, where we're thinking about the flow of time, we're thinking about the events and episodes of conflict or cooperation. And when we're doing enactments, sense making, that's all well and good. But a lot of times we're oversensitized to particular facets of our sensorium, our five senses. Other times we're overthinking things, or we're underthinking things, or we're not thinking enough about particular things. Or as Heidegger says, are we thinking? Are we thinking about the things we need to be thinking about? And that is a question of the tear, the TEAR, in the fabric of management thought. One of the things that I'm bringing to the table that I would have loved to talk to Ralph Pondy about, because he got me my start in storytelling, because he encouraged me in the papers I wrote to do that. And he was always doing these, what are called koans, K-O-A-Ns, kind of a Zen. I call him the Zen master of thinking, because he was always getting me to think differently and think more completely about things. And he would have things like, what is the sound of the other hand clapping, you know? And what is beyond an open system? And how does intuition and thinking go together? And so these kind of questions were very helpful to getting me started thinking differently. So this, what you're seeing is a diagram of the anti-narrative processes. Since 2001, I've developed 7 processes that I'm looking at. And they start with an understanding of different Heidegger terms in this treatment of them. So FORE, when Heidegger uses it, means in advance. What's happening in advance? What's already happening in advance? So when I'm looking at anti-narrative processes, I'm looking at bits of fragmented processes that are already in advance. And I've got seven words that start with B, because you have to talk to executives and you want this to be tolerable. But I also want to talk to you today about the 4 concepts, FORE concepts that are here. So there's 7. You start with the beneath, and it's going beneath what Pondy called the language games, going beneath the grammar, going beneath the differences of, oh, my language and your language. Critical race theory in the schools. No critical race theory in the schools. And so there's arguments that are very divisive across the country. But if people really understood beneath that terminology what it meant in law, there would be probably less argument. Go to number 2, the before for having is the histories. So the thing of what we're for having in the history is multiple histories, because each kind of group, each tribe, each country, each person has their own history. Each family has their own history. So you have a whole bunch of histories. And the question becomes, whose history are you going to pick out as the grand narrative? And if they're teaching your children in school that Columbus discovered America, there's something incredibly flawed about that treatment of history, since it doesn't meet the facts of the case. And number 3, we look at bets on the future. And this is the foresight. This is seeing the future. not in a clairvoyant kind of way. If you can do that, fine, but it's understanding the process of a process that's evolving and the process that's coming your way in a flow from the future to the present to the past. So I look at future, present, past, and I look the other way, past, present, future, two flows going past each other in the present, colliding in the present. So if I'm doing a bet on the future on solar power, somebody else is doing a bet on the future on coal power, those are two different bets on the future, and we're going to evoke different histories of the before because of that. We're going to look at different nature of being, number 4, and we're going to be disclosing different aspects of being in the world. And often we're forgetting other aspects. Number 5, there's the becoming in both directions. That's why I've tried to center it a little bit. Past to the future to the past, what's happening in the present. If I go into the number 6, it's what's between, what's Heidegger called forestructuring. How am I structuring in advance what's going to be going on in my bets on the future? What's going to be going on in my beneath, my what area of freedom of being am I setting up? That sort of thing. And number 7 is for grasping. Not a term used very much in Heidegger, but it's an idea that I'm translating as mind, body, spirit. So we can be in being, as Ronnie was saying, and look at the different quantum storytellings. But we can also say there is a continuity, perhaps, of the divine going on that we need to pay attention to. Because before the beginning, middle, and end, there was a beginning before the beginning. And after the end, there's an end after the end. And that continuity of time is something that Charles Saunders Peirce wrote about. And that's why we talk about quantum storytelling. So I call these anti-narrative processes of the 4, F-O-R-E, times in advance, like the time past, the time future, the time present, the time eternal, the time of an episode, the time of a duration of a clock time, the time of a duration of a season, the time of a duration of a life. And these are all happening simultaneously, I believe. And I've drawn little blue lines to show there's a lot of connections, and there's certainly a lot more blue lines you could draw than what's in the red circle of Enthinkment.